in traffic should be there in about 5 or 6 minutes.
That's fine. We'll get the preliminaries out of the way for her.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. The meeting's called to order. We're going to have a pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have a motion on the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded that we adopt the agenda as printed. Just for the audience's edification, after we had a planning meeting, one item was pulled off the agenda. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now we'll have public comment on any topics not on the agenda. We're going to have one person signed up to testify. Margaret, did you want to testify at this time?
Pardon? No, I didn't sign up for public comment.
Okay.
Just for some of the items. Thank you.
We'll start our first discussion item. We have with us today Nancy Young with Boss Adams on our 2009 and 2010 and 2011 audits. Nancy. And this is more or less for to catch us new members up on what basically happened over the last few years. Go ahead.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm Nancy Young. I'm a senior manager with Moss Adams, and I've been with Moss Adams for 6.5 years. And I've had the opportunity to be out here at Clackamas River Water on several occasions. The first occasion was to conduct a forensic audit regarding specific allegations of misappropriation of funds in the payroll department. That report was issued in December of 2007. I then came back and visited with you on your 2009 fiscal year 2010 financial statement audit. There were some allegations made, and as part of our financial statement audit, we conducted some additional procedures on internal controls and the Oregon minimum standard requirements. Those procedures specifically related to contracting practices and internal controls, expense reimbursements. And then we are here again conducting the fiscal year 2012 financial statement audit as well.
Nancy, could you hold on just a second? I think we have some audio problems here.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if you could instruct Mr. Grafton to mute his phone until he wants to talk, because there's a lot of static coming over that phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So at this point, I would like to just hear from you if you have some specific questions about any of those engagements that have been conducted, or if you need clarification on what the forensic audit is compared to the financial audit, compared to internal control procedures. Anything you would like to have the microphone.
I just have a question. Was there anything found in those audits that was wrong, or any malfeasance of any kind?
Yes, in the audit that was issued in December of 2009, we found that there was approximately $80,000 that was misappropriated through a payroll scheme. That case was heard in the courts. The individual was charged, sentenced to time and post-prison supervision. After that period of time, the additional procedures that we did in the fiscal year 2010 audit found there were opportunities for improvements in the internal control systems but we found no evidence of misappropriation of funds, self-dealings, or fraud.
So the more, it's annoying. So the more recent audits have been up to par at the very least, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Under normal audits, it's almost inevitable that there will be recommendations for improved procedures and, I don't think state-of-the-art is quite the right word, but best practice
Best
procedures.
practices, yes.
Have staff been cooperative with you in implementing those best practices?
Yes, I would say that in all of my experiences here, from staff all the way to management, everyone has been responsive and cooperative in not only the items that we found that we've presented to management and staff, to make sure that we have all the information that's relevant to the situation at that time, and then in discussion about what the recommendations would be and why those recommendations are important. We've received no pushback, we've received no argument. We might have had some good discussion along the way to make sure that we have the correct recommendation, but we've received no pushback from management or staff in any way, shape, or form. Everyone has been cooperative.
My understanding is you just completed the most recent audit?
Yes, we have. And Julie Desimoni, who's the partner over the financial statement audit, will be here forthcoming and has information to share in more detail on that. In her absence, though, Joe Karras, our office managing partner, is here.
I'm kind of the backup guy here today, so in case Julie doesn't make it in, she's flying in from out of the area, so. Plane, I think, is expecting her arriving in about 20 minutes. I don't know if I should make it out here or not. But anyway, I was here, I've been around CRW as well for the last 2 years and been involved a little bit with some of the financial statement issues, including Nancy's investigation. I've read a report as well. So, what we came out here to do today was to clarify kind of the work that we've done up to this point and answer questions about the nature and scope of the work we've done. I think one of the things that we want to make clear is that, when you do an audit, there's internal control review is a significant component of that audit engagement, as well as, when you go in to look at controls, you have recommendations on controls and controls environment. When you go beyond that is, I think Nancy's done a great job at assessing that, is when you go beyond that, you're asked to investigate certain practices, and I think, I don't know if you explained to them the difference between a forensic engagement and, an internal control engagement, but essentially, forensic.
And let me go ahead and just kind of dig into that. When we're looking at, and let's start with the financial statement audit. When we come out, we look at the controls as it relates to the financial statements. Now, we are concerned about what would be material to your financial statement presentation. So you're not looking at all accounts, you're looking at the accounts that are more risky and material. Included in that is we do walkthroughs of your internal controls and we test your internal controls. And as you've experienced in the past, we have recommendations for operational improvements. When you have evidence that there has been misappropriation of funds or inappropriate activity, as was the case in 2007 when I did the payroll forensic audit, that type of engagement is done under consulting procedures, and it is specifically to quantify a lost damage to the organization and provide testimony should it go all the way through the litigation process. Now, in this particular circumstance, the evidence was pretty solid, and the individual did a plea bargain. We still went through the grand jury process and provided that testimony. So when you're getting into a forensic audit, it means that you have evidence of misappropriation of funds, self-dealings, fraudulent activity. Okay, that needs to be dealt with harshly, and it should be. When you may have times when you say, we want more information on our internal control practices. We don't know. So maybe when we come in, we would do a fraud risk assessment, or just, dig deeply into a certain area on your internal controls. Maybe your concern is on contracting practices, and that was the case in the fiscal year 2010 engagement. And so we did way deep into your internal controls over contracting practices, not only from the audit standpoint, but from the Oregon minimum standards as required in statute. We dig really deep in the contracting practices and whether or not you follow statute. as a part of that process. So in that circumstance, there's no evidence that there's been any misappropriation of funds or wrongdoings, but there's some talk, there's some concerns. Management really doesn't know whether or not the process is occurring the way they intended for it to occur. Does that help understand the differences?
Yes. My question would be, at that particular time, what did you find?
We found that there were some opportunities for improvement in the documentation regarding contracting. So in some of the instances, while there was documentation in the file to indicate that there was competitive bidding, that there were multiple responses to a contract, we felt that the scoring could have been better documented, maybe accumulated into one document, so it's summary, so you didn't have to dig through it. We also found that when there's changes to a contract, we'd like to see that actually better documented, as well as to the purpose of the change, and then the costs associated with that, so that it is transparent and accountable to anyone who's looking at it. But we did not find any evidence of, self-dealings, misappropriation of assets, anything that would have caused alarm to indicate that maybe something wasn't above board.
So when you found that there were some processes that should be better done, I guess, for lack of a better word, pardon my syntax, I would assume you made recommendations to that effect?
Yes, we did.
And were those recommendations implemented?
I believe those recommendations have been implemented, and Julie can address that when she gets here later.
Okay.
But we made those recommendations, and the recommendations had to do with the level of documentation, as well as when you're contracting under a sole source, to make sure that your documentation on hand supports that decision. Now, I can go and I can re-perform those procedures, and I can come to an answer, but it's just, you need to have done it. Clackamas River Water needs to have done that themselves.
Okay.
So what I'd add to this discussion is that every financial statement audit, especially an audit in the nonprofit world where you do, or even standards, has a fair amount of internal control review work in it. What we've done over the last couple of years is expanded that work beyond what you would do for simply a financial statement audit to investigate certain allegations that have been made. So we investigated those additional allegations that have been made during the financial statement audit process. So the deviation that when people are talking about between what's done in an audit world and the forensic audit world is really a matter of degree more than it is a matter of change of processes and procedures. It's a matter of degree, how much detail you go to. So in this case, we've done a fair amount of additional audit work over the last several years here because we've done additional investigative activity. So what we're here today to do is explain to you that what we've done over the last several years with regard to the audit. In Julie's absence, I said I'd probably cover where the current status of the audit is and give you input onto that process. So I'll go ahead and do that. And this doesn't hurt to have Nancy here as well, so from that standpoint. But the audit process is essentially complete. We're in the final review stages of the audit examination. Within a audit firm as Moss Adams, we have several levels of review. And so what happens is the work papers are done, the engagement's completed, and then it gets reviewed by not only the engagement reviewer, which in this case is Julie Desmoni, so she's the most familiar with the work paper. Gets reviewed also by a concurrent reviewer, so it's in that phase where Julie's completing her review and the concurrent reviewer will be looking at it soon. The engagement is expected to be issued prior to the deadline date, which is December 31st, 2012, and our financial statements also require us to issue, findings from an internal control plan, but those are what we call the SAS letters. We expect to issue those before the next board meeting in January, so those should be completed prior to the board meeting in January, and those should be coming to your attention. So we believe that the financial statements and the letter will all be in your packet that you'll have in January for the board review for the current year statement. So everything's on that timeline at this juncture. We also do a fair amount of what we call risk assessment as part of our audit engagement because, again, as we talked about, it's a matter of degree and scope. And so this year, we went through many areas, again, like we would have last year. We've gone through revenues and receivables being a major issue. We've also gone through work orders and plant material in a little deeper scope than we did in the prior year. We have also tested payroll again this year. We've also tested disbursements and expenses. And then we've gone to the Oregon minimum standards. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Nancy.
Yeah.
The Oregon minimum standards.
Yeah, I will talk about that. So the Oregon minimum standards are set up in statute, and it's a requirement for any municipality in Oregon. And some of the categories that are looked at there specifically relate to your contracting practices. Are you doing fair and competitive bidding out there? Your budgeting process, so did you post your budget? Did those interested individuals have an opportunity to make comment, provide comment? Was it approved? Did it go through the formal process? Any amendments to the budget? Did it go through an appropriate process as well? It includes looking at your cash and investment procedures, whether or not you're banking with an approved financial institution that has the appropriate backing, whether your investments, should you have any, follow your investment policy and you're not operating outside those investments, whether if you have debt, whether you have any debt limitations, any restrictions, and requirements for repayment on that as well. And so in the procedures that Joe has described, normally what we have done what we do is we do a sampling approach. We take a sampling of those contracts and test them. However, in the 2010, we actually tested all transactions that went over a certain threshold that specifically requires competitive bidding. So we didn't do sampling, we looked at everything.
And then this year, it looks like preliminary findings at this juncture are that we found no material weaknesses in internal accounting controls, so the letter should be.
You just answered my last question.
And then we also haven't found any significant deficiencies, and that would require that the recommendations we've made have been followed up on by management, because if they don't follow up on our recommendations and we think they're important, then that becomes a significant deficiency in internal control. So. And then at this juncture, the Oregon minimum standards definition, reportable conditions, I'm not a government specialist. I've been an auditor for 35 years, but I'm not a government specialist, as either Julie or Nancy is. With regard to the Oregon minimum standards, you're looking at, in my, layman's term, I would say, it's a deeper analysis of internal controls, because when the government hands out money with regard to grants and awards, they want to follow that grants and awards a little deeper than you would otherwise. So I think the Oregon minimum standards are set up for those purposes, essentially to make sure that you're following it beyond what we consider generally accepted auditing standards in a non-NFP world. So there's a little deeper analysis there, and at this juncture, we haven't found any deficiencies from Oregon minimum standards either. The one area that might be in your letter this year would be, though, is we're always making comments about things. And so one thing that, when you look at your negative operating margins that you've had this year, I guess that'll be an area that may have a comment or two in it about what your intentions are and plans are to change the negative margins at this juncture. So there'll be some comments in there about that. There'll be some follow-up recommendations from our standpoint. So one of the criteria that we have as auditors is to make sure that the entities we audit are a viable going concern going forward, and so that standard requires us to comment when we see significant negative operating margins. So that'll be probably a comment that we might see this year. So outside of that, it'd be better if Julie is answering any specific questions, but we'll give it our best shot here to answer any questions you might have about what the status of that is.
Any more questions?
Yes. So you're telling us we're not going to receive the audit before the end of the year, but it will be filed with the state before the end of the year?
We said we'll be delivering the audit. It'll be delivered before the end of the year. It'll probably be filed, but at this juncture, it'll be part of your board packages, I think, for your January. I'm not sure exactly what the dissemination is expected to be internally here, but we will be delivering a completed audit report prior to your end.
You said probably by the end of December you deliver it to the state. Are you going to deliver it by that date, or do we need an extension, is my question.
Sure.
Yeah. So the audit report will be completed by December 31st, and you actually are the ones who file the report with the Secretary of State, and so there's no reason for an extension or even discussion about an extension. Joe mentioned earlier that the SAS letters would come, after the first part of January, and that's, standard. It's not required to be delivered to you at the same moment that the financial statements are. So we are on track and on time.
Any more questions? Oh,
Just
go
one
ahead.
more question, please. You mentioned a negative operating margin. That's even with our very significant rate increase?
I think that's the thing that you need to analyze, is where that leaves you after you do your rate increase going forward, as to where the rate increase is sufficient to offset your negative margin. So that's the question that's out there, I think.
Because I believe the plan was to bring in about $800,000 before the end of the year.
But
And I noticed
yeah.
we went negative something like 1.5, I can't remember the exact number, in the rate stabilization fund in the first part of the year. I assume that's part of it.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, is your rate increase sufficient to allow the district to continue to operate in a positive cash flow basis, I think, going forward.
And that's been a situation of several years standing.
I think there'll be a comment, as I mentioned in our report, with respect to that, especially in the South Central problem.
I just want to make things clear for, in my head, and so that the audience can hear. A few years ago, you went around and asked people, meaning the board at that time, what their problems were and their complaints. And then you're specifically qualified to do a forensic audit, and you did a forensic audit on all of those complaints you heard.
Yes, and so, so there's two things there. One, as far as, my credentials, I am a certified public accountant, but in addition to that, I'm also a certified information systems auditor and a certified fraud examiner. And have spent, my entire career doing fraud investigations. And when I'm not working at Moss Adams, which seems like never, I am an adjunct professor at Portland State University, where I teach forensic and investigative accounting. And I'm leading the forensic accounting services for Moss Adams, our firm as a whole, not just the Portland office, but our entire firm. And then your second comment about, when we did the work in fiscal year 2010, we interviewed the commissioners, each individually. I met with each one of them myself. I met with the prior auditors, Van B. I interviewed staff directly, one-on-one, to make sure that we had captured all of the concerns, and then we quantified those concerns, or we summarized those concerns to make sure, because some things overlap. And then we, very methodically went through and looked at and said, okay, what could have a financial statement impact? What could have an operational impact? What could affect the Oregon minimum standard requirements? And we worked through each one of those in our procedures during that engagement.
We now have a new majority of the board. What is your plan for the future? Do we need to repeat that process?
So that's a really good question, and I guess my reply back to you would be is, what are your concerns? Do you have an area, are you concerned about contracting, or are you concerned about payroll? And what we should do then is we should look at that and say, okay, is it just a concern, or do you actually have evidence that an inappropriate activity has occurred? Because the two are very different. And in addition, I'd also throw out that, maybe you could look back on past practices and say, I don't like the management decision that was made over this. Management decisions, good or bad, they're not illegal. Okay, so I want to be real clear as to what is it that you would need. If you have evidence of inappropriate activity, a self-dealing, okay, misappropriation of funds, then we would need to do a forensic audit. Okay, if you have concerns about a control practice, the procedures over, and I already use contracting and payroll, so we use those again. We can come in and we can dig deeper under either a consulting umbrella or agreed upon procedures into the control practices in those areas where you have concerns, and we can report back to you. If it's just general concerns that we are always going to have whenever we do a financial statement audit, and in accordance with Statement of Auditing Standard 99 entitled Consideration of Fraud in Financial Statement Audit, we would include those procedures within that umbrella under that SAS. For example, one of the things that statement requires is something of a surprise nature each year. And Joe mentioned earlier, this year we did some procedures that was a little bit different than last year. And that's part of complying with the Statement of Auditing Standard 99. So as far as what you would need, I guess I need to come back and ask you, do you have a concern or evidence of inappropriate activity, something that really needs to be investigated, and that it looks like it's a wrongdoing, but actual evidence in your hand that that has occurred?
Then what you're saying that when and if we have Moss Adams do the next audit, and some of the commissioners have concerns, then you might do a spot forensic audit at that time?
Yes, we could do that, absolutely.
The main differential is degree of scope. Again, as you work your way down, you start financial statement audit has a fair amount of scope to it, and then you can go, if you have a particular area you want additional review in, that's not necessarily a forensic audit, even though you may do all the same procedures. The question is, what is your belief is the outcome of that? If you believe there's fraud and you want to hire somebody to testify, the forensic audit usually becomes a little bit more detailed. But essentially, it's working off a belief that you have that there's fraud. And therefore, you're engaging somebody to investigate the fraud, determine the level of the fraud. So there's quite a bit there's a distinction there that I don't know if we're making that clear here.
Yeah,
but that's a little bit of the issue. The control work, the amount of testing you do, the conclusions, they're all very similar in that dynamic. The difference is small.
I will also add, when you're doing, fraud investigation, forensic services, it's not necessarily based on what's material to the financial statements. So you could have a category that is just, financial statement-wise, it's not material. Okay, materiality-wise, we could accept it being all in error for financial statement purposes. But a forensic audit is not based on what's material to the financial statements. It's based on just all the dollars within that bucket. There's no materiality, there's no tolerable misstatement, and we don't sample. We look at every single transaction within that category for the period of time that you have that concern over. It's a very robust process.
And I would say, I've been auditing for years and years, and discovered fraud through our financial statement audits numerous times in my career. So it's not that you're not auditing and finding fraud when you do an audit. You do run across fraud, and you do expand your scope if you do run across something that is suspicious. So our standards require us to investigate for fraud to start with. But also, if you have specific evidence and you want to go further, then you usually work your way into, as I said, you're trying to determine actually the amount of the fraud in a forensic examination. You're trying to determine, was this 10 grand or was this $1 million of fraud? And so from that standpoint, you do a lot more digging to find out every dispersion of transactions. So it's really a degree of scope that you're talking about.
If the board was to decide to do something different rather than just a regular audit, what is our time frame in order for us to make that decision? For next year?
Yeah, your time frame is, you can communicate back to me what time period that you're interested in, when you want to have that work done. And, we will be available, and we would be happy to work with you again. So, and we would work with you directly in setting that scope, so that it's very clear what we're looking at, what it is you want to have answered by those procedures in the period of time that we would be looking at.
Yeah, since I was the only commissioner present here who sat in the meeting where decisions as to what was going to be examined were made, which happened in executive session, without revealing the specifics, what I would want to have on the record is that, yes, Moss Adams did collect a lot of information, put it together in an organized fashion, and then brought it to the board. Two former members are sitting here. And Ms. Desimone asked the board majority what they wanted reviewed. That was different than what I personally wanted reviewed. What I personally wanted reviewed, I do not believe got reviewed. And my other concern has been all this time, and perhaps now we can get an answer. The board came out and voted another $15,000 for whatever it was. The contract, that contract extension never came back to the board. I have no personal knowledge whatsoever of what was actually done for the extra $15,000. So The decision was made not by the auditors, don't hold them responsible for that. The decision was made by the CRW board majority as to what was actually looked at.
Any more questions? If not, your time is up, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we understand it more.
Thank you.
I know I'm not an effective substitute for Julie, but I appreciate it. I can listen to my speech, and I'll let Julie know that we tried to cover for him, so next time she'll probably get you.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank Moss Adams for, it seems like he did a very diligent job. And as a newcomer to the board, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we have an opportunity for public comment on this auditing process. No one has signed up. So, does anybody in the audience want to say anything?
I would request the chair arrange to have the audit provided to us whenever it's delivered to CRW before the board meeting, because last year I didn't even get a chance to ask my questions. Thank you.
We'll take care of that.
Super, thank you so much.
The next item is insurance update.
Thank you very much.
To steal a little of your thunder, we have a proposal for insurance, and we had a complication today, which was a good complication. We had a second insurance company submit a bid today, but we haven't had time to completely vet that proposal. And today, of course, we told everybody was a deadline, so what we're going to do is have Mr. Ribbs and our staff vet the new proposal completely and provide copies of everything to the board by next Wednesday. And then sometime Thursday or Friday, if we can schedule a board meeting, we'll make our decision about which one it is. So today, so if your trip wasn't worth it, we'll let you talk and ask any questions that we might want.
Thank you.
For the audience, we have not released the names of the companies that have proposed these bids, and we won't release them until the next board meeting. So we're referring to them as proposal number 1 or A, and the one that came in today will be 2 or B. Thank you. Go ahead.
As I mentioned earlier, we set a series of priorities. Our hope was to get a public entity specialist that would step up and offer the broader coverages. With that, our belief, our hope was that understanding public entities, they would be easier to work with the situations that we have. The original bids were let shortly after the termination. The non-renewal notice came out. The non-renewal notice came out September 26th for special districts. Most all of the bids went out on the 2nd of October. The industry standard, most insurance companies won't take bids more than 90 days in advance. So most all of those bids went out on the 2nd and 3rd. In doing those bids, we had picked up some data that from one of the carriers that opened the door for another opportunity that went out on 10/19. With that, several carriers stepped up that are specialists in public entities nationwide. Those are the 2 carriers that are today before us entertaining the quote. The good news is that both are offering a full package with a couple minor exceptions. As I had mentioned, the directors and officers liability and the employment practices liability were problematic. Neither carrier has offered to cover those. We do have a quote for that through a third party. All other lines are being offered through those carriers with one exception. The first carrier that came in, Proposer A, did not include earthquake and flood, which was a request on the application. They do in their normal package. When they did their inspection and were down at our lower lift that brings the water up from the river, it was noted that prior floods had gotten close to that foundation, and we learned on Monday when we got their bid that they would not offer earthquake and flood. The second proposer came in over the noon hour today, electronically. So they did meet our deadline, but unfortunately we haven't had a chance to really vet it out and determine all the coverages that are there. Interestingly enough, their proposal does include earthquake and flood, but I don't know, I haven't had a chance yet to compare the policies, the quotes, to see what they may not have involved. So we are excited that at least all of the major bases are being addressed right now, and anxious to compare the two proposals and then vet those out with you.
Any questions? Mr. Gray? Oh, Pat.
So at this point in time, being the 20th, we are told that you have two proposals. We don't know who they are, at least I don't know who they are. And can you state with assurance that one, I know you haven't looked at the second one, let's call it Proposer A, with the exception of earthquake and flood, is an available market? I mean, if you give them the order, will they bind coverage?
If we give the order today, they will bind coverage. And it does include an umbrella. It includes all the general liability, which was our biggest concern. Our property, our inland marine, the equipment breakdown, crime, the auto, other liability.
Now, are the limits of coverage secret as well?
No, they're very similar to where Special Districts was at. Keep in mind that Special Districts does things differently than the insurance industry does. Special Districts is a pool, and they actually start their coverage jacket by reading off the Oregon law, Oregon Tort 30.26 or 30.300, which is how a public entity would be sued. The insurance industry doesn't do it that way. They start with a general liability jacket and add forms. So it's difficult to compare the two, but it's a very, very broad package. It's a package that we see across the country with public entities.
One question.
Ken.
You indicated that applicant A did not include flood and earthquake.
That's correct.
Is there a, for lack of a better word, sub-policy available?
Yes, there is, and we're pursuing that also.
So with one, you would have basically 3 policies combined, and with the other, you would have one entire policy with one company. Or
There
is it
will always
one
be
in-
at least 2 companies.
At least 2, okay. All right, that's fine, thank you.
Since Mr. Phillips alerted me to the fact that we have something new in our very familiar brand new purple package, has this been gone through before in the meeting? No, it has not. Okay. Are you going to go through it?
I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
Well, somebody, it says you're the principal person, so.
Oh, yes, okay, please. You should have a sheet that
I assume you're the one who's going to.
lays out premiums, and I did a comparison with SDAO from last year to Proposer A for premium. I wanted you to have a good feel. Various parties have thrown around all kinds of numbers of where it might be at. Last year with special districts, you were $182,062. This year without earthquake and flood, the first proposal that came in puts us at $190,384. We have to add earthquake and flood into that quote, which would take it up a fair amount. The Proposal B, again, I haven't had a chance to review it. With earthquake and flood, it is significantly more than where we're at here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
until we have everything all set up and together, I suggest that we wait for our attorney's review until that time.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Do you have a second? Second. And with discussion.
Considering that we are very late in the meeting, considering that we don't even know what this is, I still have some questions. I don't see anything in here related to deductibles, which is a significant factor.
Thank you.
Frankly, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to let me ask a couple questions.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Ask all the questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so deductibles.
Please.
And
on the
how do
employment-
these all relate? This is SDAO, this is A.
Yeah.
One presumes, okay.
Let me try to address the deductibles for you. On the directors and officers and the EPL, we will be at a $7,500 deductible, which is great. Significant improvement over what we had last year.
It's cheaper, yeah, we had 10,000 last year.
I think we had 50.
Oh, I'm sorry, we had 50 across the board. That's correct.
The general liability with Proposer A is a 0 deductible. And then, of course, the employment practices piece will be $7,500. And then the deductibles on the property vary up to $1,000 for certain items. Our current deductibles with the automobile are lower. SDAO has incredibly low rates for that. We're going to recommend that we raise the deductibles subsequently, which will reduce that price a little bit under the auto plan. So all the deductibles are at 1,000 or less, with the exception of the employment practice.
So with the exception of knowing what the coverage cost is for earthquake and flood, effectively, CRW, the ratepayers, are in better condition in that they will have $1 defense, legal defense coverage and $1 legal liability coverage, rather than having to absorb a $50,000 deductible.
In that example, yes.
Thank you.
One final question.
Yes.
When the packages come to the board
Yes.
for our review,
Yes.
prior to a subsequent meeting on either Thursday or Friday, whichever we decide, would you just give us, on top of that package, a single sheet that indicates the basic coverages, the basic costs, and the basic deductibles? Real clean, real simple. I don't particularly want to have to weed through 60 pages of legalese. I want to know exactly, like I do with my own home insurance or my car insurance, this is my deductible, this is my cost, this is what's covered, this is what isn't.
Absolutely.
Real simple.
And I'll do that at the 30,000-foot level, if that's all right. What I would like to do, because our industry is problematic in being a side-by-side comparison, I don't like that. I'll probably give you a sheet per proposal.
And I, of course, want all the detail.
Absolutely. Other questions, concerns I can address?
No?
When will we meet again? When will you have company B?
We're working on Company B right now as we speak. I did not violate any laws trying to read it as I was driving, but I did go through it as quickly as I could in the car. There are parts of it that look very attractive, and I want to stress the thing that really pleases me is the original strategy to have public entity specialists here at the table has paid dividends. We're looking at a package, which is a good thing. So it looks sound, but I have a lot of homework. So I'll probably be reading that tonight and this weekend, and then most likely be back with you by the by Wednesday, and then we'll try to vet it out Thursday and Friday, if that sounds good.
I think you can take Christmas Day off.
Just one other question, to be sure to include in your response. With SDAO, all of their insureds fell under a certain cap. So if we had a major flood on the Clackamas,
Yes.
that might have been problematic. Will there be that kind of a geographic cap?
That's a good
For lack of
question.
better term?
SDAO had bought a single limit for all quake and flood, and I think that was $100 million. This most likely will not be that way. But quite frankly, because of the cost of earthquake and flood, more than likely we'll be recommending what's called probable maximum loss. What would be our worst case scenario? Earthquake and flood right now, to buy even a $10 million limit here would be quite significant. More than likely we'll be recommending a number that is a little more affordable, that would pick up really our plan. All sites, not to belabor this too much, all sites are on an elevation table. Currently, you have no what's called A and V. Those are the two most dangerous
Right. We're not in floodplain.
sites. And that includes our lift plane. It falls under a C, which is a great thing for us, although it's probably the most scary piece of property we have. More than likely, we're going to suggest this will be a limit for this district, at least from what I've seen so far. My guesstimate is you're probably going to be looking at about a $5 million limit that would protect. I need to do more work. And with that said, this year was scheduled to do another appraisal series, so we'll want to be on top of values again moving forward midterm.
So the other SDAO insureds should thank us for removing our exposure from their pool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You were talking about vetting Thursday, Friday. We have to make a decision either on Thursday or Friday.
I will be ready
So-
Wednesday morning.
So,
You'll be ready to distribute Wednesday.
Yes.
yeah, it's got to be ready for distribution on Wednesday, so that at least on Wednesday or Thursday, people can read it and go through it. And then we either are going to meet on Friday or Thursday to make a decision, because after that, it's too late.
Ken, thank you. We'll be ready Wednesday morning.
Okay.
And I have a lot of broadband, so you can send me something up to 15 megs with no problem.
Thank you very much.
Did you have a statement?
No, I was just gonna recommend that we pick a Friday morning to meet and actually go through for board review and approval. My recommendation.
Friday morning? What time?
Well,
What time do you want me?
10 o'clock, 9 o'clock?
that's
9?
That's fine.
Work for everybody.
Too early.
It's a little early, I'd like to make 10:30 if we could.
10:30? Captain, 10:30? I think we can make it.
Oh.
Figure that
Hi,
out.
Grafton. See there?
No wonder it was so quiet.
Is he?
Oh, yeah, we should dial him back. When I talked to him earlier, he was in a
What was
snowstorm.
the question?
Oh, there you are. You're awake.
What was the question?
Is it okay to meet Friday morning at 10:30?
It sounds good. Is there going to be food, or should we bring something?
And that's Friday week, right? Not,
Friday week.
not
Yeah, Friday
tomorrow.
week.
Not tomorrow,
Yeah.
next Friday.
All right, next Friday at 10:30.
Right.
Sounds good.
Thank you. We'll now go back to the motion, and Hugh was a little vague on his motion. I think there's a board policy that says we need a lawyer's review of this, and his motion was to suspend that.
That's actually not a board policy.
Oh, did- I thought it
The board policy for
It's not.
That's the agent of record. I don't think the board policy requires a legal review of the policy itself.
It does not.
was. I'm saying correctly. The motion is, we don't want to have any lawyer time. say aye.
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 Opposed? Was it unanimous? Will not vote? Oh,
No, I was gonna say I'll abstain because I think it's moot.
okay.
I said I will abstain because I think it's moot.
We have this insurance update, and we have an opportunity now for somebody from the audience to testify or give comments, whatever. Before.
I can sit here, Jeff.
State your name and address for the record.
Barbara Kemper, Clackamas, Oregon. I was surprised, rather surprised after being told that special districts wouldn't grant the insurance to the existing board and sort of separate, that they were able to find, some people were actually willing to grant it, and it sounds like at a price that's reasonably comparable to what we paid before. But I was wondering, why was the suggested motion for premium not to exceed $250,000, which is $70,000 more than the one proposal? Why would it be that much more?
Just wanted to know why the motion initially was to not exceed 250,000 on the quote. That was just basically a ballpark.
Oh.
Just trying to figure out where we were going to be for some budgeting purposes. Obviously, I think we're going to come in under that, and of course, that was the objective all along, is to get coverage at a reasonable price.
So it sounds like there's going to be coverage for pretty much what you've been paying.
It's a bit more, but it's
Not
what we need. Not as much, not as bad as we thought.
Okay,
Well,
for,
and actually can't really significantly
For the
better
district,
because
yeah.
$50,000 deductible.
Yeah.
One will not.
We may have the deductible, as Pat points out.
I mean, that's a big.
It is difficult to say without the earthquake and flooding there what the cost will be. So it will be more than special districts, that's excluded so far. But there will be some additional cost that's going to take it up, and
Additional cost, but broader coverage.
but those costs aren't from the area where we thought the cost.
no,
was from.
exactly.
We were talking to another insurance agent to try to give us some help to make sure we got the insurance, and she told us that basically the cost of insurance is gonna go up this year on almost any policy, so I think we're in the ballpark. Go ahead, give us your name and address for.
David Blair, 9840 Southeast Eckler. I have a suggestion. I would suggest that you meet on Thursday rather than Friday. If you have any glitch or have to contact anybody, you're up against a dead-end weekend. There may be places even shut down on Friday if there are any questions to come up, and you would have a little bit more margin if you were to meet on Thursday.
Thank you.
Cool.
Anybody want to reconsider?
I really don't care. I'm free on either day, and my wife's out of town, so I can do what I want.
I'm fine.
At the moment.
And
Up to a
you
point.
just set the date and I'll be there.
Yeah. If you think it would be better, Mr. Chairman, to go
I
to
do think it's a
Thursday.
good idea, yeah. I do think it's better to have that margin. If we have questions, for example, and we won't know until probably Wednesday, if we have questions, right? And a lot of people just take off the week.
Grafton,
Between
can
Christmas
you
and New
meet
Year.
on Thursday at 10:30 instead of Friday?
Thursday at 10:30 would be fine, Doctor.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go on to our action items. Carol, that word.
I've got a 8-year-old son that's got a Christmas play. Unless you need me here, I may go watch him. Merry Christmas.
I'll do it.
Thanks.
Mr. Griffin, thank you very much for your hard work. I know it was difficult. Thank you.
Thank you.
And none of us,
Staff, thank
nobody
you.
wants to be away from their children right now.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Carol.
Good afternoon, I'm Carol Blake, the CFO for Clackamas River Water. The next item on the agenda is the presentation from Julie Desmoni, but she's not here yet. She was flying in from Denver, so I'm not sure when she's going to be here. And I think Joe pretty much covered where we are on the current year audit. I have been in discussion with Julie, so if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be happy to address those.
Based on your discussions, has there been any red flags raised?
The only thing that Julie had mentioned to me is the same thing that Joe mentioned, that our revenues are not covering our costs. However, I reminded her that we did have a rate increase last year that was effective in May. So in last year's, in the fiscal year 12 financials that we completed, we only had one billing cycle that included that rate increase. But in this current year, we've had the rate increase all year. And when I get to my financial reports, you'll see that that has benefited the district.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is the cost of service and rate study. Carol, what's that?
So this is the item that we talked about at the last board meeting. And one of the things we discussed was increasing the scope of work with FCS Group to include some additional time with FCS.
Just a minute. I violated my own rules again. We need a motion first.
Mr. Chairman, I move to authorize the general manager to amend the contract with FCS Group with the addition of $7,000 for a total not to exceed $56,000.
Second.
Now,
So just a little bit of background, we had entered into a contract for $49,000 with FCS Group, and they were beginning the benchmarking, the cost of service and the wholesale rate analysis for the district. This amendment will cover additional interaction with staff and the Board of Commissioners requested by the board. I would anticipate at least one meeting that would be more or less a work session where we could sit around the table and the board members could discuss with FCS the areas that they're going to be delving into and just getting clarification and recommendations back and forth between FCS and the board. We've anticipated that would add an additional about $7,000 to the contract for a couple of extra meetings. And so we've got the motion on the floor to give you a little bit of the current status. The original contract was $49,000. Through December 18th, we had spent $2,660. Of that money, what we did so far was the project initiation with FCS. We had a kickoff meeting. We had some people by phone, and we had one consultant here in the offices. FCS Group had some input with MSA regarding the benchmarking, and I've got some more information on that to provide to you coming up. And FCS has also done some review of the data that they've received. They've got about 3 years worth of consumption data by account for all of our customers. And then they've also taken that data and edited it to divide it between north and south as they're doing the cost of service. They're going to also separate where the costs are incurred in our system. So the remaining contract balance at this time is $46,340 that we have not yet been billed for.
Pat?
First a question. I know that the Eaton system has the capability of breaking out base rate versus, if you will, consumption rate. Are you still not doing that?
We have not done that. We have one general ledger account for water revenue. We can extract that information from the utility billing, but it takes a little bit of calculation, and FCS Group is doing that. They have a model that they can put the numbers into.
Okay, because that's critical.
We could change and add an additional general ledger, and that could come out of the recommendations from SCS Group, and certainly something that we can discuss with them. Right now, they are developing their cost of service based on consumption and base rate, and they have the data that they need to do that. As far as how we report it in the general ledger, right now we have one account number for water sales.
So let me be sure I understand. They are developing it in toto, or they're developing it split?
They have a model that they can put all of the information in. They have the meter size as well as the consumption by account. So they are doing their analysis based on where the revenue is coming from.
Okay, so I want to be sure I'm clear. So they're based on base rate and then separately consumption?
Yes.
Not combined?
Right.
Okay. My concern, Board Chair Sola, is that it seems, what I was trying to get at was getting the information that goes to FCS and getting their work product that comes back, not spending almost, it was originally $8,000 to sit in meetings and have them read to us from a PowerPoint. So what is being requested today doesn't satisfy my concerns. And if all it is, you know, several hours more PowerPoints, I think it's a waste of our money.
Board, have any comment?
Well, my understanding is that the rate study was broken down into 4 parts. 3 parts were contracted under the general manager's authority beneath $50,000 for $49,000. And essentially the $7,000 is for the 4th portion of the study. Am I correct at that?
The reason we could get the $49,000 was because they did the revenue requirements piece a year ago.
Right.
So that's essentially the first portion. In addition to that, now they're going to do the benchmarking and the cost of service and the wholesale analysis. So those are the other 3 pieces. However, with the original $49,000 contract, we would get a report at the end saying, here's what we think you should do. With this additional $7,000, we will have meetings earlier in the process where they can sit down with the board and say, this is what it's looking like, and answer any questions, talk about any concerns about how the rates would be structured, and then also a presentation at the end identifying options for the board to select from.
So the process with additional board participation as a result of this opens the door for discussions where we could sort of brainstorm what the options might be, rather than just receiving essentially a report, here's your option, that's it. This way we have some opportunity to have some input into that process and maybe discover additional options.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
And would it include providing the data that I requested earlier?
Certainly that data can be made available. I am not sure what somebody that is not a rate maker would do with every individual account and the consumption throughout the district.
Well,
the other information that they're using, Commissioner Holloway, is they're using our budget, they're using our financials. And as you know, we just went through the issue with the South Fork Water Board. They made their proposal based on their budget. That's the American Water Works Association recommendation method, as you start with the budgeted numbers. So they have all of the current financials. They will get a copy of our financials that are going to be completed in this next week or so. And then they have the current year budget that we're operating out of.
well, my concern is this. It sounds like what's coming out, rather than a cost of service study, is a second rate study. And the to my view, fatal flaw in the first one is that it dealt only with expense, principally. And we projected an increase of 5% every year ad infinitum. And so without looking at what actually went into those costs. So I want to be very clear, my concern in terms of the information that the board receives, I do not want to know what Mr. Johnson's monthly water bill is. What I do want to know is what are the factors and the amounts that are going into their calculations. And as they come back, since I don't want to repeat of what happened before, where they were told to lump everything into the base rate with no input from the board. I mean, frankly, that's what I'm concerned about. I don't want to repeat of that. So the information I want is sufficient information not to let that happen again.
Mr. Moore, do you understand what Pat is trying to get at?
Mr. Chair, yes, I do, and at least I hear what she's saying. One of the reasons that we put that additional $7,000 in there was to receive, at least the reason I put it in there, was to receive information from the board as to what it is that you wanted in the rate modeling. And the work session was really to give you an opportunity to talk with the consultants to make sure that the concerns that you have are heard before we get too far down the road. And so it really is an opportunity for you to provide staff with what you want those meetings to look like. I think there was one certain and two additional meetings, and so we have plenty of opportunity with that $7,000 to design the type of meeting that you want.
So during that meeting, then we will bring up what Commissioner Holloway is concerned about.
That was what was envisioned.
And speaking for myself, I like the fact that with the additional meetings, we'll be able to participate, because part of it is the three of us are playing catch up on water districts. We need to learn how these things work. It's a chance, so for me to say, this is what my expectations are in a rate study without knowing the processes and the methods by which they do their evaluation, I don't have enough knowledge at this point to be able to ask an effective question or to make an effective recommendation. So to me, that's an opportunity for us to learn those things, and then from there, if I think there's something that we might want to do differently, I'll have a knowledge base for suggesting. Right now, I don't have that knowledge base, and I don't think, certainly the three of us don't.
Well, Mr. Chair, that was what we were reacting to, because when we initially had talked about this, there was one meeting scheduled. And we said, well, let's put the additional meetings in so that we make sure that we get everybody's concerns, or have a process for getting everybody's concerns dealt with.
Mr. Chair, I think it's essential that we have the opportunity to meet with the group that's doing the work, understand how they're getting their figures, where they come from, and then we can make a valid decision. Otherwise, we're in the dark.
Understand. Is there opportunity between the first meeting with the group to have public comment so that we know how the public feels?
Yeah.
Last time there was a advisory group, which I guess I was a little critical of.
Right.
And so that we can have all members of the public come and talk to us about what the rate should be.
We can fashion those meetings any way that the board wishes.
Well, we could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to pass her.
I was going to say, Commissioner Kalani is on the right track. I can't possibly tell you what it is I want unless I have an understanding of the process. And so I can't tell you I want X piece of information. If the consultants come to us and say this is what they're collecting, that may satisfy all the needs. But until we have that information, I don't have a clue.
Ken?
Well, which I think is making the argument to go ahead and go forward with this, by the way, but.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's what discussion's for.
Yeah. We're talking roughly 3 meetings, and so I would assume that we could have one of the meetings where at least a portion of that meeting could be for public input, and then we could go into a work session for the board with the FCS group and go on from there, something like that.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. We could fashion that in a way that the board would like to see it.
And that would come sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I don't have any more questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Carol?
So just to continue, I know there were questions at the last meeting about what the benchmarking was going to look like. And I think that this will address some of Commissioner Holloway's questions with regard to what information are they going to look at, and are they going to look at only revenue, or will they be looking at expenses? So FCS Group has contracted with MSA, which is a local firm, to do the benchmarking. And they have a lot of experience in this. And this is a list here of the entities that they anticipate looking at. Now, these are not the entities that we normally compare ourselves to, but if you look at these entities, they have water treatment plants, they have distribution, they are much more similar to ourselves than, for example, Oak Lodge, that simply takes care of the distribution and is part owner of NCCWC. So this will give them kind of a broad opportunity to look at other water production and distribution facilities to compare our cost with these others. I've got another slide coming up here that also shows the some of the performance markers that they're going to look at. And this gives them those comparables between us and somebody else.
This is going to be
Any more questions?
Yeah, the wording, I much prefer that the board president sign everything in general. I don't see any wording here that says anything other than it's going to extend a couple more meetings. So what, we need a wording. We need that contract extension to this contract. In other words, how's it going to change?
You think about amending the motion now?
Carol is waiting something else.
You have attached an amendment to the contract that adds $7,000, and then there's a memorandum from FCS Group attached to that that explains the expanded scope. Everyone should have that in.
Oh, this is our new material?
Yes.
Okay. Again, I would really request, if you can get this stuff to us ahead, how in the world are we expected to absorb it all while we're discussing something in a meeting?
I'll give you a moment to read that.
It's a meeting of the board in public, so we're here to work.
It's the extension to scope of work C. Which, I mean, it doesn't really say anything.
Well, it says,
All it does is bump up the price.
well, it says 2 on-site presentations, including presentation materials on the second page.
On the second page of the handout.
Let's see.
So we're looking at 2 meetings.
Oh, their
for-
cover letter, okay.
Yeah. It's 2 meetings for us to participate in.
Well, I'd feel better if the contracts are more properly drawn, if they actually say what they're intended to do. I'm not going to object at this point, but I think it's sloppy. It's improper contracting.
Mr. Chair, we didn't know what exactly you wanted us to do, and that's why we put it on the agenda. So, because at the last meeting, the issue was the 1 meeting versus the 3 meetings. And so until we've heard from you, it would be difficult for us to do.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none.
Who opposes?
I couldn't understand.
What did you say, Grattan?
I said Commissioner Sterling opposes.
Thank you. And now we move on to the consent agenda. We have a motion.
I'd like to remove the financials from the consent agenda.
Is that CA1 or CA2 that you want out?
You want?
Upson Road. That is CA1.
We have a motion to amend, to remove CA1.
I'll second it.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of the consent agenda, say aye.
Well, that would be voting on CA2
Yes,
to accept it as is?
yes.
Aye.
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 You have a feeling, Grafton?
Commissioner Sterling votes aye.
Okay. Unanimous then. Now down to informational reports.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
are we going to address CA1 before we go down any further? Because it was pulled.
Yes, it was removed from the consent agenda.
Right.
Put it on the
So we can
future
address it.
meeting.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
Future meeting.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
We're taking it off the consent agenda and putting it as an action item on the future meeting.
Oh, for a future meeting?
Yeah.
We're not going to act on it today?
Right,
That was
hopefully
the
not.
motion.
That was not my understanding. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought the purpose of removing something from the consent agenda was for the purposes of simply asking questions regarding the item on the consent agenda. And then after those questions are answered, you either pass that item or you reject the item. That was my understanding of removing something from the consent agenda. Am I incorrect on that, or am I correct?
My concern is actually,
I thought I was correct.
goes back even to last month. I think that there are some arithmetic errors, but I did not have time to get them sorted out to bring to the board tonight, so it doesn't make any difference. This money is all spent anyway.
I had four little questions about some items there. I just wanted to know what they were, but that didn't mean that I wanted to vote to not get the job done. That's why I seconded the motion, but I believe the intent, if I understand the rules correctly, when you remove something from the consent agenda, it's not to move forward, to put it on a subsequent agenda unless you specifically say that. It's just to be able to ask questions on the consent items.
Pull it out for discussion.
Exactly.
I have no particular bias either way, but I will bring back my concerns about the peculiarities to the next meeting.
So I just have four quick questions,
Okay,
if I may ask Carol.
that was an action item.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My first question is item 77300. Boley Public Works fee for CIP. What does that mean? I know it's Bureau of Labor Industry.
Yes. When we have contracts, CIP contracts, I believe there's a dollar limit. I'm not exactly sure what that limit is, but when we do have contracts that exceed that limit, then we are obligated to pay at prevailing wage. And there is a fee that was set up by the Oregon legislature to charge everybody that utilizes those contracting methods. So it's for capital improvement project contracts. We're obligated to pay prevailing wage, and when we set up those contracts, we send a fee to Foley that helps fund their work.
Thank you. Next one was 77321. cross-connect annual fee with Oregon Health Authority. What does that mean?
That, again, is a fee that we pay to help support their work. The cross-connection is where, when somebody has like an irrigation system or a fire system, that makes sure that there's no backflow issues, that their water from their system does not flow back into our system.
Thank you for being patient with me. I'm still trying to learn, so. 77323, Polar Systems Tech Consulting Support.
Polar Systems is the company that we utilize for maintaining the backup of all of our server data. And we also use them occasionally for consulting and technical advice on some of those kind of specialty things. Because we're a relatively small district, we have one IT person and nobody knows everything. So we have the access to some of the technical people from Polar Systems from time to time.
Okay. And then the last one I have is 77382. It says Ferguson Enterprises Incorporated inventory and non-inventory, 3 separate times.
Simply 3 different invoices for buying some parts for either projects or inventory on the
It's
shelf.
purchase of parts.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience.
Can we have a motion to accept this agenda item?
Then I would move to approve consent agenda item CA1.
Second.
And there's no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Have 1 opposed.
Did you hear that? Did Grafton say anything?
Right.
Did Grafton say anything?
Grafton, did you say anything? I guess we lost.
Not hear a sound. Probably the solution.
We're down to informational report. Carol.
And it's still, okay, here's the financial reports. We'll start with the accounts receivable aging report. At the end of November, we were approximately $35,000 less than the balance in September. Again, I compare every other month because we bill every other month. So the balance for the end of October would be really high and doesn't make sense to compare. We're also down about $120,000 from this number with the December bills currently being prepared. So we will have bills go out December 31st. And we are a little bit less than the AR balance a year ago. So we're doing okay with people paying their bills. In our cash and investment position as of November 30th, the dollar amount has gone up by over $250,000. So with these high summer water use months, we are bringing in more money than we're spending. So it's increasing our reserve balances a little bit, which is a good thing.
Which should make the auditors happy and S&P happy.
Hopefully it will.
Thank you.
So one thing I would like to explain to the board, since we do have some new people, is why am I reporting some stuff from November and some stuff from October? So the cash and the AR balances, we get to the end of the month and it's pretty easy to capture those numbers for reporting to the board. We tend to have to delay on the financial reporting. This month, we probably could have done it because we delayed the meeting by a week, but it still would have been kind of tight. And the reason we have delays is when we have internal labor being utilized on capital improvement projects, we wait until the payroll month is done, and we pay every other week. So we had a November payroll that covered December or October activity. So it makes it a little bit harder to get that information put together for a second Thursday meeting. And then additionally, once we've done those CIP calculations and we've pulled the internal labor and moved that over to the capital improvement projects fund, and we have added the overhead, then we do the calculation based on each fund's share of the local government investment pool. And so finally, after we get everything else done, then we can do that interest entry. So we're always going to be 1 month behind on the financial reporting, but we will give you the current receivables balance and cash balances every month. So if we go back to the end of October, which seems like a long time ago now, that was about a third of the way through the budget. And our general fund revenue is at 45% of the budget. Now, again, that sounds great, except that we bill bi-monthly. By the end of October, we have had 2 billing cycles of the 6 for the year. And we've also had our 2 largest billing cycles. The August and October are our biggest billing cycles. That's when we have the most water usage. If you look at the water revenue, we've actually done some analysis. What would we expect after the October bills? And we would expect to be at 44.63, and we're still a little bit ahead of that. So we're about almost $30,000 ahead of where we would estimate our water revenues to be. Our SBC revenues are actually tracking pretty well for the year. And I don't know that we had any that came in November, but I do know that we've still got a few that are kind of in the pipeline of people that are planning on installing new services. So system development charges are tracking pretty nicely with the budget this year. So now if we look at the expenditures, we're at 27% of expenditures. So we are kind of holding tight on the expenditures. We will have some things that will come up in the second half of the year that could get us closer to where we would expect. And as we just heard this evening with the insurance, that is going to be a larger dollar amount than we had in the budget. We did budget $50,000 for unknown potential insurance deductibles, so hopefully that $50,000 will get us where we need to go to be able to cover the insurance within this year's budget. And our CIP expenditures are still fairly low, but the JTA project that Bob George, the district engineer, has been working on is going to be moving into more of a construction phase in the spring, so those numbers should be coming up. And here's a schedule that I like to share that just kind of shows you where we are compared with where we were last year. Now those percentages, the 45.64 versus the 40.05 for the total revenue, those are comparing the revenue to the current year budget. So our water sales budget for 2012-13 is higher. That's where we anticipated about $800,000 for the year with the rate increase. So we budgeted $800,000 more. So it's a percentage of the budget, but it still shows that we're tracking a little bit better than we were last year at this time. We had warmer, drier summer as well, which helped. So the next thing is item 8D. We do have some budget committee vacancies. This year we have 3 vacancies. So here's how the budget committee is made up. It's the 5 board members as well as 5 citizen members. So we have 2 citizen members that are continuing on. I've put up here when their term ends. And then we have 3 vacancies. So one of the vacancies is due to Chair Soa being on the board rather than being on the budget committee. Mr. Poling was on for 1 year, filling another vacant spot, and Gary Kirk has served for 3 years. So we have 3 positions open right now on the budget committee. Again, kind of a reiteration, 1 position that's filling the last 2 years, and then 2 positions that are full terms. Currently, what we've done to recruit budget committee members, we do have a notice posted on the CRW website under finance. We will be including a message on the December 31st bills. And my experience is that word of mouth is probably the best way to find committee members, so I would encourage board members to talk to their friends and neighbors that live in the district and see if they would have an interest in serving on our budget committee. And that's all my informational reporting for this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just for your clarification, does the board generally act on only the positions that are vacant, or do they act on all the positions?
Just on the vacant positions.
decided in budget law, or?
It is, the budget law requires a matching number, board members and citizen members. The method of recruiting is more or less up to us, but they do need to be residents of the district and customers.
Joseph?
Yes.
Budget law requires that, just as with commissioners, that the budget committee public members rotate on a 3-2 basis. That sometimes goes awry, you don't, it's not me. Sometimes goes awry when, as happens in this case, you move on to the board. So there is a standard for the appointments on 3-year appointments. They're 3-year appointments.
Yes.
Exactly. So, and if someone is appointed to fill a spot that only had a year to run, then they're just on hold for 1 year. That's how it works.
Okay.
I'd like to see us get some new blood, so to speak.
Is there provisions for removing a budget member? Okay.
Good question.
We'll find that out.
We can ask the general manager, might know.
Nope.
Is there provision for removing members of the budget committee?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the answer to that, but I can certainly get that.
It'll be in the building department's manual. I actually do have one question, and this goes back to the first quarterly numbers that you gave us. For salaries and wages, we have a budget appropriation of $2,523,096. We've paid almost $500,000 at that point, and we have a balance of $2.6 million. Can you tell me how that happens?
I would have to look at the report. The report is relatively manually generated, and so I would have to look at that. And I will say that we did combine a couple of titles. We had like a project team leader that got rolled into the manager line item, and that may be where that error has occurred, and I will validate that and I will send new information.
Well, these are just the totals.
I understand.
And so
The totals are generated from something, so I will have to verify that and I will get back to you.
if we bumped our budget by $100,000, we probably want to know about that. Because it shows that our balance is greater than our original budget.
I understand.
After we pay
I
$500,000.
don't have the report.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. We now have our engineering report. Bob, yours. And Kelly.
We have a short PowerPoint. We're on agenda item number 9A. We've included both 9A and 9B into the PowerPoint, so we'll just go from one topic and then go to the next. And in between, you have to ask questions. This is the status report for the cover breach project. And let's see here. Basically, the scope of the project is to build a water line from Carver across the bridge to our southerly side, ultimately tying into our water system on Hatton Road. The project
I'm gonna, first, because the PowerPoint's a little bit different from all the data that I gave you quite a bit of description of the project, which I assume you read. What I really wanted to summarize mainly is the bridge is under construction after almost 3 years of delay. They have torn down the bridge and they have a temporary bridge for the traffic if you've been out that way. They built the piling on both sides and they are proceeding to build the bridge. The intent, of course, was to have a water line from our north side to the south side service areas. The bridge was torn down in April, September. I believe, from my discussions with Wildlish, who is the contractor for the county, that they should be starting actually laying some bridge beams this spring. It's going to take about 2 years for completion of the entire project. The original project was presented as 3 phases. The first phase was on the north side, which is where we tied into the Sunrise Water Authority system for our water source. For the first couple hundred feet, 12-inch water was to be constructed. The second phase was the bridge portion, which is under construction at this time and contracted. That is the first several hundred feet of the bridge, across the bridge to the south side, and then beyond another 400 or 500 feet. That was the limits of the contract for the bridge. What we did, we contracted with the county, used their engineers, and bid through Wildlish for the water line work. So we'll build the bridge and the water line as a complete project. We will be incorporating our own inspectors with the county, so we'll have a lot of say over making sure it's built according to our standards. The third phase ties on to the south side of that water line. Down Springwater Road, down Patton Road, ties into a 6-inch water line on Patton. That third phase hasn't been scheduled. We have done estimates on it, but we have not designed it yet. Basically because of the length of the phase 1 and 2 work. There was no reason to design it yet until we're ready for that. We have presented, I think in our budget meetings in the past or discussions with the previous boards, the cost of that. That's where we're at right now. So for the next year and a half or so, we'll be seeing some bills. We'll be budgeting and rebudgeting. We have the money budgeted. We'll of course adjust that budget on the cycle to reflect the remaining portion. Basically, the project, the bridge portion, is going to be split over a 2-year fiscal year. So each time I have to readdress the budget, bring it to the budget committee, and authorize the allocation for the to be year 2013-14. So that will be coming up. Any questions?
I'm a little confused on the first page, page 1 of 7.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the scope and connecting or forming a connection to the Sunrise distribution system.
Yes.
It says here that it was not done, if I'm reading this correctly. And also, in order, I believe, in order for us to do that, we'd need an IGA with Sunrise, which I haven't seen the site of. Do we have an IGA with them?
Over the last 2 years, we've had a multitude of emails and discussion with Sunrise Water Authority. And the decision at that time was to incorporate this water purchasing through our agreement that we have with our IGA, with our wholesale agreement. So with an amendment to that, we would sell water, and at the other end of their district, we would buy some of that water back and feed it across. That IGA was put on hold by Sunrise Water Authority. The discussion at the 11th hour, as we were ready to bid the phase 1 work. With the design is done, we had all the documents ready to go, and without a signed IGA, we couldn't really go with the construction. So we put that on postpone. It's not a large amount of money, and it's still $80,000 worth of work. It is, of course, the important part of the project. That is our water source. So here in the next 6 months to 9 months, we'll be working with Sunrise to get that IGA presented to you.
Now, I don't recall having had sight of that at all. I don't believe it's anything that came to the board.
Nothing has come to the board because Sunrise Water Authority had not agreed to it in writing yet.
And then my other question is, I know Sunrise originally had planned to put their own line across in a reserved space. Has that gone away now?
That has gone away. They have no plans of putting the water line in the bridge, and they were not able to reserve a spot on the bridge. The only way the county would accept placement on the bridge would be if you build a water line on the bridge. Otherwise, and they do have the slots in their design for at least 2 other 24-inch lines. All the way across the bridge, there are cutouts for whoever wishes to use it in the future. At this time, Sunrise has no plans to do that work.
Okay, so basically, the 78,000 is unspent, it's sitting there, we'll rebudget next year.
Correct.
Thank you, that answers all my questions.
I have a question. It seems to me I read in some of the older minutes before I came on board, almost a year's worth, but there was some discussion with it about the Sunrise agreement. Is that correct, or did I misread it?
There has been discussion with the board, work sessions about the issues, but nothing has been formally brought to the board for an agreement, and I believe that was the question.
Okay.
But we have had those discussions.
What was it that stopped it? You said it stopped at right at the very last minute. What happened there? Why didn't it go through? I'm just asking the question. If it's an embarrassing question, I'll withdraw it.
No. These discussions are all interconnected. This is the existing IGA that we have at Sunrise is one that we're going to have to be looking at as a part of the rate study. The 190 discussion was part of this, and also the joint operating plan with the various other water providers was a part of this. And about 6 months ago, I believe, when we broached this with Sunrise, they asked, as Mr. George has indicated, to table the discussion. We didn't get into the particulars as to why they did that.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
I have been talking to their staff and their general manager for 3 years over this issue. We did hydraulic runs. The water is available, but they chose to postpone it. So we did not advertise the project, and it's tabled like this at this moment.
That actually leads me to my question, if I may. The sense I'm getting from Mr. Moore's statement is that all of these discussions are wrapped up in one big bundle. So should we not go forward with some aspects of it? And we did start this on the understanding, I believe, that we would be able to, in essence, buy our water back from Sunrise at the other end of the pipe. Does that make all of this moot? I know the alternative was to run a pipe, which was much more expensive.
I will make one statement. I believe with the changes of boards, both here and at Sunrise, that they were not well versed in the issues that we had discussed. Staff to staff and been talking about the IGA wholesale water at Carver, and they were not comfortable at that moment to say, yes, write me a letter and say, go for it, CFW. So I think it's a matter of some education and going back to it. I will point out we do have a contract. Designs are done. Pipe has not been purchased yet, but it would be a relatively expensive proposition for us to withdraw that contract to the county. Not impossible, but it would cost us. And we would probably lose a relatively affordable method of getting across the river to the south, which, well, as one of the past board members, you understand it.
Sure. So you think it's a learning process, not a, do this, or we're not going to sell you water at the other end? put it.
Oh, I never had that indication at all. It
Great,
was really an
that's super.
education.
I'd be very
I
surprised,
think it was
but
education.
I thought it was
Yes.
a question that needed to get legally addressed. Thank you.
So when the bridge is done, we'll have a long tunnel with nothing on each end unless we move forward with some other process.
That is correct. We'll have a pipe across the bridge. We'll be about 200 feet short of our water source, at Carter, or with Sunrise Water Authority.